career paths in my mind are never a fork in the road. The deep space tracking station out at Tidbinbilla, if you've never been there, you've got to go once in your life. It's pretty amazing. He asked me an amazing question. It was just a question, right? It really made me stop and think, how do I actually drive and generate more purpose with what I do? With the fact that I'd realised that I was a bit burnt out as well, mate. So I'd kind of gone, I hadn't had that career break before.
All right. Ben, thank you very much for joining us today on Simpa Says. Really appreciate you taking out the time all the way from PNG.
Indeed, mate. Long way from PNG.
Tell our viewers what your current role is, and we'll come back to that right at the end of the interview.
Yeah, sounds good, George. So at the moment, as you've alluded to, I'm based in the eastern highlands of Papua New Guinea, a town called Goroka, which is about as far away from Australia as you can get. I'm an organisational leadership mentor with an NGO up here for the next 6 months. So pretty exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we'll come back to that. I'm super interested to hear about it and how you got that opportunity. I'm sure a lot of people will as well.
Yeah.
But let's go right back to the start. When was the first time in your life you said to yourself, okay, that's what I want to do? When was that moment? Were you in high school? Was it early on?
No, it was probably high school. Yeah, it was probably high school. I don't know, maybe about year 9 or 10, when I really started to get interested into maths and science. I grew up in Yass, a country town in New South Wales, not far from Canberra. And I remember a school trip we did to the deep space tracking station out at Tidbinbilla. If you've never been there, you've got to go once in your life. It's pretty amazing. So it's part of the Deep Space Network where NASA communicates spacecraft around the universe. And that was the first moment where I thought, yeah, this is actually what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be either involved in that or wanted to be an astronomer. That's actually the first moment of clarity I had around what I wanted to do. Now, obviously, things turned out pretty different, but that was the first moment where I thought, yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, it would be. The astronomer thing. I can see that. How old were you when that happened?
15, maybe 14 or 15, I would say.
Very impressionable age. Was the Royal Australian Navy the first full-time job that you had, or did you have something before that?
No, that was it, mate. Yeah, that was definitely the first major role I had as in adulthood, if you like. Look, well, I guess what happened is I had a bit of a choice to make at the end of high school. I did pretty well in high school and was heading down the university path. I got accepted into University of Wollongong in a computer science program. But I was at that stage in my life where, I don't know, school was pretty easy for me, George, but I didn't really love it. I didn't love that kind of study. And I come from a family that's got a strong military heritage, my father, my grandfather. And so that really appealed to me. And then what appealed to me about the Navy was I really wanted to then do a trade rather than go down the university path. And I really wanted to get into electronics and use that kind of brain that I had when I was younger to good effect. And that sounded exciting to me, the opportunity to go and learn and study and get paid for it, and also a bit of travel and adventure. So it became, in the end, a pretty easy decision for me, mate, to go down that path.
Was it your parents or grandparents that had the military background?
Both. Yeah, in fact, both my parents.
Both? Okay.
My mum and dad both were in the army, both served. They met in the army. My grandfather went to both World Wars. Uncles over in World War One. So that was the kind of background I had. What my father told me, he's passed away now, but what he told me when I was young was, he said to me, George, he said, I don't care what you do, just don't join the army. That's all he said to me. He didn't have a great time. I love that kind of world, and the Navy was the next best thing.
One of the things that's always fascinated me about people that I've met since I worked at Microsoft is people who've worked in armed forces, military, always seem to have just a drive that other people have got it, but it's almost like a very common thing about people who've been in the military. Do you feel that when you were in the Navy, did that build something that you didn't have before being in the military forces to
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%, George. Look, if I think back, the way I think about it is I kind of grew up in in the Navy, which might sound a bit odd, but I was 18 years old when I joined, and I grew up in a country town. Wasn't a sheltered upbringing, but I didn't grow up in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane. So joining the Navy and that experience, what it gave me was some pretty amazing life skills that I still leverage today. Things like tolerance, so the ability to just get on with people and the ability to collaborate with people from all walks of life in an operational environment where you just have to make things work. You don't have too many other options other than just knuckling down and getting things done. And that the other big thing that I got out of my time in the Navy was sense of purpose and sense of mission in those very specific words. And that's something and we'll get there, right? But that's kind of why I'm here today in this place, the Eastern Highlands of Papua New Guinea. That sense of purpose became really critical for me. That there was an end to what I was actually doing. Now, I wasn't the only person contributing to that end. There was a lot of teamwork involved and those sorts of things, but it had to kind of mean something to me. And that's something that really stuck with me out of my time in the Navy.
That sounds common. I have interviewed another person who's been in the Australian Army, and it sounds very similar, some of the traits that they got out of there. At what point in time, and I'm looking through your LinkedIn profile, so nothing super secret there that anyone can't look up themselves. The first role you had outside of the Navy, and maybe you can take us through the type of work, skilling or education you got into the Navy, was a network design engineer. Well, at what point in time did you say, okay, it was time to leave the Navy and then move into private sector essentially? And how did you find that transition?
Yeah, there was a couple of things. Some of it was lifestyle, George. So some of it was about just that moment in my life where I got married. I met my wife, and the armed forces gives you lots. It's an amazing sort of grounding place for young Australians, in my opinion. But it has some drawbacks as well. You've got to move around a lot. You've got to get sent on deployment at a moment's notice. You spend a lot of time away from your friends and your family. I'd kind of made that decision based on lifestyle that I really wanted to stay in the one place and spend time with the woman that I not just met, but just married. So that was a big thing. The other thing that was happening at the time was there was a lot of outsourcing going on in the technical space in the armed forces. This is 20 odd years ago, maybe a bit longer than that now. One thing I really prided myself on and the skills that I built, the technical skills. I did a technical trade. I was an electronics technician focusing on communications. So that gave me some transferable skills out into the civilian world and the corporate world. But what was happening was we'd be out at sea on operations and I'm responsible. I was the only electronics technician on board. I had to make sure everything worked from the radar, the sonars, the communications kit. But we'd come alongside and contractors would come on board and take over all my kit and do all my maintenance. And that was part of Defence's strategy at the time. So I thought, well, there was a bit of a Venn diagram there of things converging where I wanted to settle down and why don't I go be one of those contractors and probably getting paid more to do similar work. And that's sort of where it came from. I made a pretty it's a well-worn path to go from the military to work in the defence industry, which is the first part of my civilian career, working for Boeing Integrated Defence Systems at the time, not on the aircraft side, but working in that defence sector. I had the military background, I had the military skills, and it was a relatively smooth transition to make.
I think that's definitely something I've noticed that is very advantageous for people who've been in different military forces, is the clearance as well that you think you need to have
Indeed.
Working with some of those government agencies.
Yeah.
Just point that out to our viewers.
Yeah, indeed.
You're at Boeing for about a year and a bit, and then you went to Raytheon. Now, I don't think I've actually heard of Raytheon before. It does say classified program, so I'm assuming that again, your background helped you get into there. Can you take me through? Yeah. Was that sort of the first part of, I guess not the word managerial, sort of leadership that you would have because you were the program director?
It was. And I remember at the time, it was the first time I'd been presented. The reason I ended up at Raytheon was more of a commercial one. It was really about the type of work that was going on. We'd bid on a big program, but Raytheon was actually doing some of the work. They approached me and I said, right, well, that sounds great. But very soon after starting on that program, there was a bit of movement in the program, and I got offered the program manager role or the team leader role. And that was the first moment where I'd gone, okay, up until that point, fundamentally I'd been a technical person. My technical knowledge and experience was what had got me that far. Now, sure, in the Navy, I was what they call a leading seaman, which is kind of a corporal equivalent in the Army. So I'd had leadership skills and leadership training. But in the corporate world, this was the first managerial role that kind of got offered to me. And it was interesting. Even back then, I got great advice. And it's something, and you'll have heard me talk about this, George, that career paths in my mind are never a fork in the road. You never have to make that choice of heading down manager path or technical path. It's just a different set of experiences. You can move between those worlds throughout your entire career, which I've done. I was very lucky to get that advice way back then. I thought, well, why not? Why not just give it a crack? And that's what I did, and I loved it. That was my first program manager role, not really knowing what I was doing. I've got to say, I knew the program, so that was the good bit. I knew the program, and I knew enough about the technical side to know what the program was trying to achieve. And I also had relationships. I had relationships with the customer who was a part of Department of Defence, so that was helpful as well. I wasn't an unknown to them, and I kind of grew into the role from there.
Sounds awesome, mate. I was about to say, don't we all jump into roles that we don't know what the heck we're doing when we get there? You had an opportunity, and this is, actually a couple of years after I joined Microsoft, to become the premier field engineering manager in our Canberra office back then, was for federal government and public sector at Microsoft, where you and I obviously got to know each other. Take me through, what do you think, number one, how did the opportunity, that's probably the first part of the question, how did the opportunity come to you? And then what do you think were the skills that you built over your career to that point that made you ready to take on the role and then essentially get the role at Microsoft?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of an interesting story. Tell me if I'm going to bore you too much, mate. What had happened, again, a couple of things happened. Where I was working at the time, it was probably a pretty tough time in my career. We'd set up a new business unit. We'd gone through a merger and acquisition that didn't go well. It was very challenging. It was the first time in my career that I'd really come up against significant challenge in terms of what was happening in the workplace. Like, it was tough. That kind of made me pause. And I'd been there quite some time. I'd been there almost 8 years at Raytheon. And I thought, well, what's out there? What do I do next? I don't have a big IT background. I've got an engineering background, but not an IT background. And so when the role came up, what excited me was the role rather than Microsoft. And that sounds a bit strange, I know, because I spent such a long time there, had such an amazing time at that company. But it was really the role, the field engineering concept as it was back then. And what I loved and what I was good at was helping people be better versions of themselves from a technical standpoint, and really helping and being integrated with customers. And that's what I'd done really well at Raytheon. That's what I took into the role at Microsoft. And I think that's what really came through at the end of the day. And as you know, it was a pretty intensive recruitment process back then. I think I did 8 interviews. I remember it like it was yesterday, George. Doing all those interviews, what happened was every interview that I did, I wanted the job more because of the people that I got interviewed by and that I work with, people that you and I know. Troy Kirkland up in Brisbane, he was one of the guys who interviewed me. It was a 45-minute scheduled interview that went for an hour and a half because we just kept talking about stuff. And it was amazing, mate. What really stood out for me was the emphasis on people and on culture and on actually helping people grow, rather than did I know all the technology, which I clearly didn't from a Microsoft point of view. I think what they saw in me was someone that had maybe a bit of a different background. I mean, the person who hired me into Microsoft, Callan, he told me, he said, we were looking for people that didn't have necessarily a deep IT background because they wanted that diversity. They wanted people to come in with different ideas and different thinking about the role and the function. I think it was a combination of those things. And then I remember it was towards the end of the year and we were traveling for Christmas over to my sister-in-law's place in a place called Renmark in South Australia, which is a long drive across the Hay Plain. And I got in and it's like 9 o'clock at morning, and 9 o'clock at evening, and I had a missed call, and I rang the number, and it was Microsoft saying, we need you to do a couple of more interviews. This is like 2 days before Christmas Eve. And they said, you can either wait till everyone gets back from leave or you can do them right now. I said, okay, I'll do them right now. So I did my last 2 interviews at about 10 o'clock at night from a back veranda in Renmark on the phone and ended up getting the job, mate. So I don't know. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that sounds funny. That sounds about right. It sounds about right. So you're at Microsoft, for those who don't know, for quite a long time. You did a bunch of different roles. I'd love to ask you about one of the roles you did take. You ended up moving to Singapore, and you were looking at some of our smaller markets in Southeast Asia.
Mm.
What was the drive to look at that? Was that another one of those, the opportunity was there and it was something that was a challenge for you that you wanted to do?
Oh,
Or was it something you were looking for?
Oh, it was definitely something I was looking for. I remember early on, and I can't remember the context, but I, I I saw a presentation from Norm Judah, who you'll know very well, and for the viewers, he was the CTO of services for a long time at Microsoft, and he explained this model of experience called the kind of T model, which is where the cross of the T is breadth of experience and the upright of the T is depth of experience. And he was really big on emphasizing breadth of experience. And that's something that really resonated with me. And it was also a bit about, again, a lifestyle choice. I got an opportunity to travel a lot in the Navy, getting exposure to new cultures, but I'd never lived and worked overseas. And I really wanted to do that, just test myself and go learn a different culture and go work in a different place. And so I sorted out and I got great advice from my manager at the time, Mr. Frank Lucarelli, who you probably remember as well.
Yes. Good old Frank.
And Frank gave me great advice. He said, you got to be intentional about what you go after in your career. Because I said to him, I remember having my conversation with him, I said, I want to live overseas. And he said, where do you want to live? And I said, oh, anywhere. And he said, that's not a great answer, but not because you're not flexible, but you got to convince me of the why. Go and do some research and go and do some analysis of markets that you want to go and work in. And so I wanted to work in countries that, or at least deliver services into countries that were maybe less developed than Australia, because again, that's a different mindset and a different skill set that you need to go and have influence in those places. So when the role came up in Singapore, but as you said, supporting the smaller ASEAN countries like Brunei and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, that was just really jumped out for me. And again, I was lucky enough to get the role and move up to Singapore for a couple of years, which was an amazing experience, I've got to say.
It sounds like it. I remember going up there for a couple of weeks and catching up with you during that period.
Yeah.
It's very warm up there.
Indeed.
Very warm in Singapore. Then you were at Microsoft for a few more years. I'm assuming maybe that itch started coming through again. You left Microsoft in September 2022. It looks like you took on a few things. I assume was that volunteer work that you're doing part-time? Then the role that you took on as the Director of Customer Success at Workday for ANZ.
The exit from Microsoft, well, I've been lucky enough, George, to have a couple of amazing career mentors throughout my professional life. And one, a guy by the name of James Stanbridge, I don't know if you remember James. He was the general manager of field engineering for APJ, and he's had a big influence on me. And I was chatting to him, and it was a little bit about the 10-year thing, right? It was a little bit of kind of, okay, don't get me wrong, I had an amazing time at Microsoft, mate. I could have easily stayed there forever kind of thing. But that 10-year thing, you get a bit old, you get a few grey hairs, mate, and you go, well, what does that next 10 years maybe look like for me? And I was talking to James, my mentor, and he asked me an amazing question. He said to me, is your value more about how well you can work and navigate within Microsoft versus how well you can deliver your function in industry? And it was just a question, right? And it really made me stop and think, George. Microsoft's an amazing company, but it's also vast. And sometimes I felt like you can get lost under layers and layers of a lot of process and procedure that sometimes takes you away from what you really love doing, and that's serving customers. And so it was a bit about that. And then again, like a few times in my career, it was a little bit of a sliding doors moment where this opportunity cropped up through a company that I really didn't know loads about, being Workday. But again, we all build networks right throughout our career, and there's a few wonderful people at Workday that I still know very well that I'd worked with at Microsoft, a guy by the name of Fred Nylander, who I spent some time with up in Singapore. So I reached out to him and said, well, what's this Workday thing all about? And what really attracted me to Workday was the role. Right. I'd never actually done a customer success role. I'd done field engineering, professional services, chief operating officer roles, but never in that pure customer success kind of lens. So that was really exciting. And the customer set is pretty similar to Microsoft. And also the tech was interesting to me. Workday, 100% born in the cloud SaaS product that work almost exclusively in the HR management space and the financial management space. That was really interesting. The opportunity to work with more the business side of customers versus the IT side of customers that I tended to do in the Microsoft role. And also the culture of the place. It's probably Microsoft just turned 50, right? Workday's just turning 20. It's not a small company, don't get me wrong, but it had that small company feel through the interviews I did and the discussions I did. So that was an attraction as well. So again, it became a bit of a leap of faith, but one I felt pretty good about and still do because, again, I had an amazing time at Workday. With Bouncer, Bouncer came about through, again, just some networking. Over my career, I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time down in New Zealand, working with New Zealand clients on the commercial side, public sector side, which I've really loved. I've loved that difference that working with New Zealand customers brings. I find New Zealand customers a little bit more, they have a little bit of a greater risk appetite in terms of technology adoption. And anyway, through a connection down there, I had a couple of people reach out to me who were founders of a startup called Bouncer. And so what Bouncer tried to do was connect mentors with mentees through a platform. It was really interesting. And so they were right at the beta testing phase, and they just wanted mentors to come along and test some things out with them. And so that's what I did in that context, which was an amazing experience as well. I'd never really been in that startup space before, albeit in a very small capacity. It was amazing experience.
That sounds awesome. Then that probably leads me to the next question, because a lot of what you said sounds like you've driven a lot of your career through what's next, what sort of experience do you want? Was that the main driver for you to look at your career break now and to work on what you're working on now with the up in Papua New Guinea?
I guess there was a couple of things. Again, work and life were always intertwined, George. And some of it was about, again, a moment in my life where my wife went through some pretty significant medical challenges. She's through that now, right? We're all good. But when something like that happens, you kind of go, well, okay, well, what is this work stuff all about, right? Is it about, I've been very blessed, mate. I've done amazing things. I've had the opportunity to work in some interesting places across the world. But what it made me think about was that thing that I first thought about when I started working in the Navy was purpose. What am I actually here to do, or what am I doing with the work? Because I'm lucky, mate. I feel like I can do a lot of different things and there's a lot of opportunity open to me. So it was a bit of that to say, how do I actually drive and generate more purpose with what I do? With the fact that I'd realised that I was a bit burnt out as well, mate. So I'd kind of gone, I hadn't had that career break before. If I think right back to when I went from Boeing to Raytheon to Microsoft to Workday, there was no gap there. And it was all opportunity driven. So I'm not saying that anyone did that to me, right? It was just opportunity driven, and career management is 50% timing at the end of the day, I think, right? Being in the right place at the right time. But, it sort of maybe sit back and go, okay, well, let's take a break, right? I need one. And then, as I took that break at the end of last year, I started to kind of do some exploration around what that next phase, if you like, of my career and my professional life look like. And my wife and I have always loved travel. We've had the opportunity to work overseas before and deliver services overseas. And then again, an opportunity just arose with the Australian Volunteers Program that I looked at it. I thought, oh, okay, that looks pretty exciting. And my wife's always said, we can go anywhere, right? We don't have kids. We're kind of unencumbered that way. And I did check with her because the role came up in the Eastern Highlands of Papua New Guinea, and said, when you said,
might help,
we go anywhere, did you mean anywhere? And she said, yeah, let's do it. And that's a big part of a career as well, mate. I feel very blessed to have an amazing life partner who supports me in all this crazy stuff, right? And so that was really it. And then the opportunity to go again, live in a different place, but also really kind of humble myself again, George, right? We live pretty blessed lives in the Western world where we can talk about career management and go to this and go to that and, particularly in the technology space, get paid pretty well, get training and investment in our careers. I thought, how do I give just a little bit of that back? And that's what's driven me to here in this place in this time, being in as I said, in Goroka in the Eastern Highlands of Papua New Guinea, mates. And I don't know what's next either, George. It doesn't mean that, again, to come back to that statement I made right at the start around it's never a fork in the road, right? We're here for 6 months, right? And that'll take us through to October. And I genuinely don't know what comes after that. I might go further down this space in the philanthropy space, in the non-for-profit space. I might go back to big tech. I might do something completely different, mate. I'm not sure just yet. One thing I have learned is don't make too many plans, right? Because global financial crisis has come along and global pandemics come along, and you never can make too many plans. But I just kind of take opportunity.
So my career values are sort of similar to yours. I always have to have purpose in what I'm doing.
Yep.
I have to have some sort of passion in what I'm doing, and I love helping people. So they're the three things that I hold very highly when I make decisions about what I want to do and where I want to move next. One of those definitely sounds like purpose to you. Have you got any other values that you hold in, I guess, in your career philosophy?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of others. One is challenge. I've worked out right from the get-go, I really love being challenged. I know a lot of people say that, but really being seriously challenged. And whether that's the work that I'm doing or the environment I'm working in or the problems I've got to solve, that's really where I'm at my best, is where the way I used to couch it to people, and maybe I still do sometimes, is I love doing two things, George. I love fixing things or building things. I'm not so great at just running things, right? I need not quite a crisis, but I need that really hard challenge to get me going and get me excited and generate that passion of what I do. And I feel like I've had opportunity throughout my career to really get involved in that. I was incredibly privileged enough to lead the Microsoft response to the Black Summer bushfires in Australia back in 2019, 2020, that summer. And again, it's just, I felt like I was absolutely in my sweet spot, because super challenging stuff, trying to help communities rebuild after what happened. And so that's a big one for me, is challenge. The other one that I would say is culture, right? And again, and this is what Microsoft taught me. This is pre-Microsoft days. Culture wasn't on my radar, right? I'd worked in different environments and operational environments, but I look back now at some of that stuff I did early in my career, and where I really thrived was where the culture of the environment that I worked in was fantastic. Now, I didn't have the vocabulary prior to working for Microsoft how to express that. That's what I really learned, and that's probably the most valuable thing I learned out of my time at Microsoft. That whole tagline of culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? That might be a Satya Nadella line. I might have just stolen it from him, but I deeply believe that now, mate. I didn't when I first heard it. It's like, really? We're just going to talk about our feelings and have a great culture. And, you don't ignore strategy, but it's really powerful. And I come back to that. So they're the two other ones that I would add: culture and challenge.
Yeah, they're really good ones, mate. Culture is definitely important. I definitely see a lack of culture in some companies, and that lack of culture definitely drives people to leave. I see that quite a bit in a number of different companies. And then you have leaders of those companies wondering, why are people leaving? Well, it's pretty obvious to everyone who understands that. But yeah, it is what it is. Okay, so two more things I'm going to ask you. Actually, a couple more. Give me your highlight of your career and a low light of your career.
The highlight. Look, I'll actually say right now, mate, like tonight, not talking to you, you're a highlight, George, but I mean, where I am, look, I genuinely feel like there's been a lot of things bring me to this place and this time. And again, it's still early. We've been here only a short time, but I feel a bit emotional about it, mate. The work that I'm doing now, and the opportunity and privilege I have to be able to give back to people that are just at a different place and time to what I grew up with in Australia. So this would be the highlight, mate, the opportunity to live and work in a relatively small village in the Eastern Highlands of Papua New Guinea and give back to people with purpose. That's pretty amazing. The low light, there's been a few. I think probably The lowest point in my career was at Microsoft, and we'd done a pretty big global restructure. And we'd come from those early days of Premier Field Engineering. That's probably the best place I've ever worked from a culture. That first couple of years in PFE, Premier Field Engineering, Microsoft. And when that big global reorg happened that you'll remember well, that was very tough.
I do.
And no one's fault, right? But it was such a culture clash within a company. Within it was a real eye opener to me to go how culture can be different in a company so vastly different. That was pretty tough, mate. That was the only time I'd ever considered resigning from Microsoft. I didn't. I stuck it out, and it was probably because of that challenge piece that kept me going. But that was probably the low light, mate, for sure.
One last thing I'll ask you is, what advice would you give Mini Ben or a Mini Ben who's listening right now? Maybe there's a 15-year-old in there and living in Yass, or who's thinking similar to you. What would you say to yourself?
I would say to myself, back yourself more, be more confident. And confidence, I've learned, I was a really shy kid in a lot of ways. I've carried a lot of that through. We've all done all of the psychometric testing. We can poke a stick at right, and I always come out on that introverted side. And what I've learned, and sometimes people are surprised by that I work with or I meet, they go, "You're not an introvert." Oh, I definitely am. But there's a lot of learned behavior. Confidence is a learned muscle, if you like. And I don't mean confidence in a brash way. I just mean self-confidence. Really back yourself more. I look back early on in my career, I did a bit of that, but I could have done that a lot more. I could have taken on more challenge and more opportunity. So that would be the biggest thing I'd say, mate. Just find that inner self-confidence and just back yourself.
That's good advice, mate. That's awesome. All right, Ben. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, mate. It was an awesome story. I loved hearing it, actually. It wasn't what I expected, to be honest, but yeah, it also doesn't surprise me whatsoever. So thank you for joining us, mate. It's been great.
Yeah, my pleasure, George. Thanks for the opportunity. And we'll catch up soon when I'm back in Australia.
Yeah, will do. And for everyone else, thank you for watching. We'll see you at the next one.
Thank you for watching this episode of Sympathies. If you would like to see more videos, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Or follow if you are listening on a podcast platform to support the channel and join our community.